Lesson 9, looking at the course, Lesson 9, looking through 1st and 2nd Corinthians with the eyes of a church planter. This is perhaps one of the more challenging strange ministers for people to grasp and really latch onto. So let me contrast it a little bit to the one we were talking about in the previous lesson. When we talk about the strange minister of trouble, and we see how Paul describes it in 2 Corinthians, it's primarily a personal encounter or experience with a specific aspect of living in this world, a specific painful encounter that is sort of something we can ask a brother or sister in Christ, pray over this for me. I need God to deliver me. I need God to work in a specific aspect of trouble where I need His comfort. In Lesson 9, we're looking at a result of living in this world that every person lives with. We all are living in a world that is groaning. The strange minister of groaning. It's almost a dull background pain that every human being, in fact, Paul says in Romans 8, all of creation is groaning. It's a world that's deeply polluted by sin, spiritual death, and separation from God. When Adam and Eve were created in the image of God, all of creation was placed under their delegated authority. So they were supposed to get instructions from God. He was to be their boss, their king, their lord, their master, their friend that they were working under. And so they were to walk with Him in the garden. They were to receive words from Him. And then they were to carry that out and rule over all of creation. And He tells them, be fruitful, multiply, and care for the creation. When Adam and Eve disobeyed God, it broke that connection of getting clear understanding and perspective from God as to what it meant to rule well. And their disobedience brought darkness and disturbance and a decaying. It says in Genesis that after they sinned, that God blocked the way, that they could not get to the tree of life because now death was going to be a part of their world, a physical death. And really that was the mercy of God. I mean, can you just imagine if the people who God dealt with later at the time of Noah and the flood, at the time of Abraham with Sodom and Gomorrah, imagine every evil person that's ever lived was still alive. I mean, it's bad enough when death sort of acts as a way to remove some of the pollution in the world. Now, Christians come into this situation and we're very different. Matter of fact, in chapter 2, verse 16, and I would say that for the strange minister of groaning, overall, it comes out in chapter 2, verse 1 through the end of chapter 5. Now, there's other topics addressed in that section for sure, but in terms of the strange minister of groaning, in terms of our being part of this painful creation, that it pops up several times. And so he says in chapter 2, in verse 16. Okay, let's start verse 15. Our lives are a Christ-like fragrance rising up to God, but this fragrance is perceived differently by those who are being saved and by those who are perishing. To those who are perishing, we're a dreadful smell of death and doom, But to those who are being saved, we're a life-giving perfume. Who's adequate for a task like this? So Paul says, to one group of people in the world, we just really are like a bad, stinking odor whenever they encounter us. And he says that's the people who are in spiritual darkness, who do not yet know Christ. That we are so dramatically different in our view of creation, in our view of groaning, in our view of what we're living for, and our hope in the future, that it's like it's shining a light on the darkness and the emptiness of what they're living. Sometimes it can take just one person living a life of compassion and living a life of love to expose to a whole lot of other people that they're worshiping their money and their idols and their possessions and comfort and riches. It's just a very empty and shallow way of experiencing life. It's like we pull the gas mask off of a significant amount of the population, and the truth is this world is on a stinking death row, and our only hope is in Jesus. And so it's like an open graveyard where none of the graves have been closed, and there's just a terrible odor. And suddenly when someone walks in and they have a very different smell, it exposes the corrupt smell, the decaying smell. That seems to be sort of a major theme of the ministry of groaning. While to other believers, when they get around that same odor, they're drawn to it. It fills them with hope. How many times as a pastor I would go to visit the people who were getting over the death of a close family member, or go to visit someone who's in the hospital, who's in a very bad situation. Their body's just, shutting down on them. And to leave, and they had lifted me up because they had such a hope that this life was not all of their living, and that this groaning, it just reminded them that they could hold it lightly and let go of it easily because of the life that God had for them and had prepared for them in Christ. So, we see as we go through 2 Corinthians in this section of the book, you may want to see these notes. They're in your guide. 2 Corinthians 4:14, 5:1, and 5:11. And in there, he reminds us of what believers know that help them to handle the strange minister of groaning in a different way. We know that he who raised Jesus from the dead will raise us also and bring us into his presence. We know that these brief moments of living in this dark world is preparing us for an eternal weight of glory that's just beyond what we can imagine or take in. I mean, just read the Apostle John, the last couple of chapters of Revelation, and just let it overwhelm you with the beauty and the glory of what's coming. And this way of life lifts our vision to see the eternal things, to see from an eternal perspective. So on a daily basis, we may really sense and feel, hey, this body's being torn down. We feel naked, we feel exposed, we groan, we're weighed down. But we know this mortal life is swallowed up by the life that God has given us in Jesus. What a beautiful thought. So groaning, the strange minister of groaning, is where we acknowledge and we are aware, and it does affect us painfully in this life, that we're living in a garbage dump in comparison to the glorious creation of the garden where Adam and Eve lived, and what the restoration is going to look like when Christ returns and makes all things new, just like when Adam and Eve saw the new garden laid out for them. So, the strange minister of groaning serves a very important purpose. It helps us to let go, hold very lightly this life. And we live here as ambassadors, as just visitors, those who are passing through. And God is making an appeal through us for others to join us in that journey, for others to join the kingdom and to live for the kingdom and live under the rule of the king. In the hospitals in the West, many times family members go to the hospital and sit in a room, we call it the waiting room, because for various reasons, we can't be actually in the room with the patient at that time. Doctors are with them, the nurses are working on them, the patient may be being bathed or cleaned or whatever, but we're in the waiting room. The patient themselves, their rooms are fairly sterile. They're, sort of just one plain color. Sometimes the beds are not really that comfortable, definitely not as comfortable maybe as their bed would be at home that they're used to. The beds are short, the rooms are small, there's very little room to store things or keep things there. So it's almost as though the message and the chairs in the waiting room become very uncomfortable after just a short wait. So the people in healthcare are saying, hey, we don't want you to stay here. We want you to get well enough to go home. So groaning is like that. Groaning is like God saying to us, hey, I know this is not a pleasant place to be. And so you're groaning over it. Well, let's get it done and then leave. Stay on the mission of really preparing to go home and encourage others to go home also. The strange minister of groaning affects every created person and all of creation. It's the way things have been colored ever since sin entered the world. And it'll only be changed when Jesus returns and brings in the full expression of the kingdom. Until then, we groan. We groan inwardly and anticipate our release.